Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, we are previewing the upcoming season for the San Antonio Spurs. Before I get too far into it though, I would like to remind you all to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Without further ado, let's talk some Spurs. However, before we can really preview this upcoming season, I feel that it's necessary to reflect upon and discuss the transactions that this team made during the recently concluded off-season. It starts in the NBA draft where they selected Devin Vassell with the 11th overall pick. I think that this is a really nice guy for the Spurs to snag here. Either Tyrese Halliburton or Devin Vassell would have been very solid options for the team to draft, and because Vassell fits better into this roster positionally, I think that the Spurs made the right choice. With the 41st pick, they addressed the point guard position by drafting Trey Jones. I get that they do have already a couple of long-term pieces at that position, but Jones was just too good of a value proposition for them to pass up on. I think that I had him rated in my top 25 on my big board, so snagging him at 41 was a really nice move for the Spurs. Overall, I think they nailed the draft. In free agency, they didn't make too many flashy moves, but they did re-sign Jakob Poeltl to a 9-year, $27 million extension and Drew Eubanks to a 3-year minimum extension. Both of those moves were nice, solid moves to lock up young centers long-term on relatively inexpensive contracts. Now that we have recapped the offseason, I think that we're ready to preview the upcoming season for the Spurs. We'll do that by going over each player individually and laying out my expectations for what they can do, then finally making a record prediction for the team following the discussion of each individual player. As usual, we'll start at the point guard position with DeJounte Murray. Murray is a high-level complementary piece to an NBA team. We saw him take a big step forward in his three-point shooting, going from being a 29% shooter in his last full season. I believe it was 2017 through 2018. And then this year, 2019-2020, we saw him take a step forward and become a 36.9% three-point shooter, which is a significant increase in shooting. And it was at not an overwhelming volume, but at a decent volume. With that, in addition to his all-NBA caliber defensive acumen, you've got a really nice complementary piece. I don't think that he's the type of guy that you can trigger a rebuild around or form a contender centered around him, but I do think that he can be a really nice guy to have alongside that star and help to get your team into where they need to be. I'm sure you'll notice as we continue with this video that that's a bit of a trend with this Spurs team. They have a whole lot of really good complementary pieces and not necessarily that star player in the middle to anchor that success. Derek White is the next guy at the position. White, similar to Murray, is a really solid complementary option. He can do a bit more than Murray with the ball in his hands, creating shots for himself off the bounce. He's also a slightly better playmaker than DeJounte Murray, and I probably would trust his jump shot a bit more than Murray's. Where he is a step behind Murray is on the defensive end of the floor, while Derek White is a solid defender and plays with high effort and high intelligence. He's not the same impact guy that DeJounte Murray is. For that reason, I would have Murray ranked as a higher value, more important player to this Spurs team long term, simply because his greatest attribute is better than Derek White's greatest attribute. But both of these players are very useful. I think that both of them could be of use to the Spurs moving forward. And I also think that giving up one of them in a trade as a really solid asset as a young player could be a move that could benefit the Spurs if it would allow them to add a guy at a position of need. A deal that would come to mind for me would be a trade to the Atlanta Hawks with a package centered around Derek White, where they could receive John Collins, who would be really the offensive anchor that this team could look to build around moving forward. That might be a bit of wishful thinking, because White would be perfect alongside Trey Young, and Collins would be a great guy for this Spurs team to have to rebuild around. But if that doesn't happen, then I think we will see Derek White playing lots of minutes at both the 1 and the 2 for this Spurs team moving forward. The third point guard is the previously mentioned Trey Jones. Same position, very different player. Trey Jones is a really strong defender at the point of attack, does a magnificent job of keeping guys in front of him, and he's also very smart on the defensive end of the floor, does well in rotations, makes good decisions. All of those traits defensively allowed him to come away as the winner of the ACC Defensive Player of the Year award winner for last season. He plays at a very high level on that end of the floor, and that alone gives him a chance to really develop into a strong NBA player. But on offense, he has some value as well. He's a pretty good playmaker, and we've seen him shoot the ball well off of catch and shoot opportunities, especially during his freshman season when he was playing alongside Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish. We saw that he is a pretty good off-the-ball player. In that season, his three-point shot wasn't terrific, but we did see it take a step forward in this past season, and I think that he will be an above-average shooter off of catch-and-shoot opportunities at the very least. Where he needs to improve his jump shot is off of the dribble. If he can become a consistent threat on the pull-up, then I think that there's a chance that with that alongside his plus playmaking capabilities, he will be a very dangerous guard in the pick and roll. I also think that the pick of Jones in the second round this year will make either White or Murray expendable in a trade where they could address a different position. So overall, I really liked that pick for the Spurs, and I think that Jones will be a solid rotation piece for this team moving forward. Next, we will address the wing position, and at this position, we get to the guy that I really think is what this team has built around with all of these young complementary players, and it's DeMar DeRozan. Oh, I'm sorry. Wish I could edit so I could take that out, but don't know how to edit, so my bad. But DeRozan is a guy who's taken a lot of flack recently, and I think it's pretty undeserved. He's still a high-level scorer in the mid-range. I get that people tear the mid-range shot apart because it's an inefficient shot, but with the high percentage that DeMar DeRozan shoots it at, he actually does make it a solid shot. DeRozan shoots it around 50% in the mid-range. Like I said before, you don't love the mid-range shot analytically, but with how well he shoots it, it's all right. He's not the same explosive athlete that he once was, and that has taken away a bit of his ability to finish at the basket, but he is still an above-average slasher at getting to the rim. He really can't shoot from three, and obviously that's the big drawback with DeMar DeRozan, but I still think that he's an all-star caliber player, and this team is built really, really well around him. So I think that there's a chance that he could have another season of 20-plus point per game scoring, as we've seen him do for the past 7 or 8 seasons. He's been remarkably consistent as a high-level scorer, and I believe we'll see that continue. If he can continue to give strong effort on the defensive end of the floor, that will also help this team out quite a bit. He's clearly not good on that end, but in recent years, he's also not been atrocious to the point where he's unplayable in a playoff series. I still think that he could probably fetch you some decent value in return in a trade, but I don't necessarily know that deal is going to be offered to the Spurs, so I think that it is in their best interest to keep him around this season, have him help you make a run at the playoffs, and perhaps give him another contract at a much smaller annual value moving forward due to his ability to be a strong veteran presence in the locker room, as well as a guy who's going to be able to score the ball well for years to come, even if it is just as a sixth man role, such as the type we've seen from guys like Lou Williams in the past. Devin Vassell, is the next wing that I'd like to address here. Vassell was a very high-level 3-and-D wing type at Florida State. He was one of the better defenders in this draft. Very smart team defender. Doesn't quite have the pop on the ball that a guy like Isaac Okoro had, but in terms of making the right decision in rotations, Devin Vassell plays at a very high level defensively. On offense, he's an excellent floor spacer, shoots the ball at a very high level, which can allow for him to also attack closeouts at a decent rate. He needs to improve his game off the bounce, and there are people that believe that he will improve that game off the bounce and establish himself as a borderline all-star player at some point in his career. I'm not sure that I buy into his self-shot creation ability quite to that extent, but I do think that Devin Vassell is going to be a high-quality role player in the NBA, and I think that it was a nice selection for the Spurs to take him here at 11. Especially with the guys that were still available. If someone like Patrick Williams or Isaac Okoro or even Obi Toppin would have been there at 11, I think those guys would have been perfect for the Spurs, but considering that most of the higher upside guys who they viably could have taken at 11 were gone, I think that Vassell was a really, really nice option for them there. The next guy would be Lonnie Walker. We saw his jump shot take a huge step forward. He shot it 40% from the three-point line last season. I'm not sure how high of volume that was, so the shot might not be all the way there yet, but I do think that he's going to end up shooting it at a high level at some point in his career. He's also a pretty good athlete, so he's a plus defender. He needs to get better with his efficiency once he puts the ball on the floor and his shot creation ability, but I think that long term, this guy probably has the most all-star potential out of any of the young Spurs players. He needs to figure out that efficiency, get stronger, but if he can figure out the kinks of his game, improve his playmaking, then there's a chance that we could see Lonnie Walker be a very high-level starter in the NBA moving forward. Keldon Johnson is the other guy of the young players that I think has a decently high ceiling. Johnson really needs to iron out his jump shot and improve in that area of his game. I get it. He shot 59% from three last season, which is an absolutely ridiculous number, but it was in a very small sample size. He only played 17 games. 8 of them were in the bubble. And I would need to see it at a higher volume in order for it to be truly viable trade for him moving forward, but he is a fantastic slasher, finishes the ball at the rim at a very high level. He's also a decent defender, certainly not a liability on that end. He's not necessarily a plus defender, but once again, not a minus defender either. So he'll get the job done for you there. Overall, I think that between him and Lonnie Walker, those are probably the two higher upside guys, but there's also a chance that they don't work out in the NBA, whereas players like DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Devin Vassell, Jakob Poeltl have really cemented themselves as role players moving forward, in my opinion, from what I've seen from them. Whereas Walker and Johnson are a bit higher upside guys. That's talking about the Spurs' young core, summarizing those guys in general. Rudy Gay would be the last wing player to talk about here. Gay is a player who can come off the bench and attack the rim at a high level. Decent finisher there. He hasn't become a high-level three-point shooter. Shot at 33% on decent volume last season, but he's not a high-level wing scorer off the bench from the perimeter, but absolutely getting to the basket, that's where he does well. On the defensive side, he's not great. He's not good, but he's also not bad. He's pretty meh. So as a guy who can come off the bench and get a bucket, is a pretty good rebounder as well. He might have some value, and considering he's on an expiring contract, could be worth something in the trade market. Overall, I think that if I were an NBA team, I wouldn't have a whole lot of interest in Rudy Gay due to his limited playmaking capabilities as well as not great shooting. But I could see where the interest would come from as a guy who can score off the bench. He also might be a better defender than he's showed. He's just been challenged to take on more difficult matchups than he's capable of taking on a lot of the time. So, yeah, that's Rudy Gay. Patty Mills is actually a guy I realized I skipped over when I was talking about point guards, but Mills is a really solid option coming off the bench at the point guard position, plays good defense, can shoot the three at a good level, and is a pretty elite playmaker for a backup point guard. Once again, a guy who, for a team that could need a point guard option, would be interesting in a trade. Someone like Boston would make sense as a potential suitor. I would certainly rather have Patty Mills on my team than I would Jeff Teague as my starting point guard, especially with Kemba Walker being injured for the Celtics. But otherwise, Mills has a chance to be a really nice mentor for the young guys on this team moving forward. And considering how long he has been a Spur, it wouldn't surprise me if he remains with the team moving forward. Finally, now that we have discussed all of the point guards and wings on this team, we can move on to the big men, where you have to start with LaMarcus Aldridge. Last season, we saw Aldridge finally realize that the three-point line exists and it's worth more points to shoot it from behind there. So he started shooting those shots at a higher rate. I believe he took 3 3-pointers per game last season and shot it at a 38.9% clip, which is absolutely rock solid. He also is still a very high-level scorer in the post, which I get it isn't a super important skill to have, but Aldridge does do it quite well. If he can continue to give effort on the defensive end of the floor, where he's a decent big in drop coverage, can protect the rim at a decent level, that is where he can keep himself on the floor, maintain an ability to be a top 50 or 60-ish player in the NBA, and continue to help this Spurs team moving forward in making this potential playoff run. Jakob Poeltl would be the next guy to talk about here. Like I said before, I'm a pretty big fan of Poeltl. I think that he guards at a very high level. Not necessarily the most versatile guy, can't really guard on the perimeter very much, but he does a nice job in drop coverages of protecting the rim, which is most of what you're going to be asking him to do. On the offensive end, once again, can't do much on the perimeter, doesn't have any ability to stretch the floor or anything, but can finish at a high level at the rim, sets strong screens, and he's a good rebounder both on offensive end and the defensive end. So I like inking him to a long-term extension if I'm the Spurs. I think that considering he's still fairly young, he can be your starting center for a long time, and he's on a fairly cheap deal moving forward. So once again, big fan of the Poeltl extension for Spurs. Next guy is Trey Lyles, who has flashed some ability to be a stretch big man in the NBA. He's okay defensively, and with that ability to shoot the three-pointer, that's where he has some viability as a rotation big man. I don't think that he'll ever be anything more than that, which the Nuggets probably wanted from him when they traded him for Donovan Mitchell. As a Donovan Mitchell supporter, I have to bring that up at every opportunity. But, Trey Lyles is going to be a consistent option off the bench for your team. I just don't think he's going to be much more than that due to his limited ability doing much outside of shooting. Luka Samanic is one of the more interesting players in the entire NBA to me. I've watched a few of his games, not full games, but the highlight clips of him playing with the Austin Spurs. Would have liked to see him get some time with the big club. He only played 3 games with the Spurs last year, but from what I did see, he appears to be a high-level athlete who can finish at the basket well. He also seems to have pretty solid instincts defensively, which allows him to get in passing lanes and create transition opportunities for his team. He also, from what I've seen, has decent feel in the post where he can manufacture some open looks for himself, such as a hook shot. If his jumper can improve, I think that he has a chance to be a very high-level offensive player. But I really haven't seen enough of the guy to really vouch for him too far in either direction. Definitely an intriguing player to watch, though, and I'm excited to see if he can ever make good on that first-round pick that the Spurs spent on him last season. The last big man to talk about here is Drew Eubanks, who, like I said before, is another extension that I really liked for the Spurs. Similar to Podol, does a nice job finishing at the rim, has a bit of a nifty game on the defensive end as well, plays smart, does a nice job in rotations, is pretty good at closing out onto wings off of switches, is also a decent rim protector and can do his job there. Good in drop coverages, which I think is probably the only scheme that this Spurs team can viably run for this upcoming season, considering each of their three bigs in Aldridge, Podol, and Eubanks are best in drop coverage. But I do think that this is a very cheap deal for a guy who can likely be your backup center for years to come, which, as a player who, or as a guy who does not like spending any sort of money on centers, can definitely approve of for a team. Overall, I still think that DeRozan and Aldridge are high-level players, especially DeMar DeRozan. I hate that he's gotten thrown under the bus so frequently. I still think that he's a good player, and with all the good supporting guys around him, has a chance to lead this Spurs team to a playoff berth, or at the very least a play-in tournament berth as either the 8, 9, or 10 seed. I like the young players on this team as complementary options, and I think that if they could move off of one of them to bring in a player with some more upside, it would be a nice move for this team to make. However, overall, as currently constructed, I think that this Spurs team is a bit underrated, I think in a normal season, I could see this team winning anywhere from 37 to 41 games. So in this shortened year, if I were to make a win total prediction for the Spurs, I would have to say something like 32-40 to 36-36. Somewhere in that range is where I could see this team working out. That is if they remain with the current roster. If they move on from the veteran guys like DeRozan, like Aldridge, like Mills, like White, or not White, like Gay, then this team could take a step back and become probably one of the worst teams in the entire NBA. But as currently constructed, I like this team, and I think that they are far better than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I get that people don't like the Spurs because they view them as boring, but they have some fun young players, and I'm excited to see them play this year. Let me know in the comments what you think the Spurs record will be for this upcoming season, and perhaps a more interesting question, which of the young players do you think has the most importance to making this rebuild really work out long term? Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I think I've covered everything I wanted to. That's it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.